The Citizen Mike Show. News. Commentary. Interviews. The Citizen Mike Show starts now.
Welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike BRODINSKY. This is the episode for March 15, 2018. On my right, the one and only editor of the Record Journal, Ralph Tomaselli, and a special guest in the studio tonight, a freshman member of the Board of Education, Republican Erin Corso. Welcome back.
Thank you.
To the Citizen Mike Show.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. And these are tumultuous times in the education community. So, and we got a lot of business to cover. We're going to, at the first part of the show, folks, we have 4 clips, video clips that take us back to a March 6th joint meeting of the Board of Education and the Wallingford Town Council, where what was discussed was security in the schools, issues like mental health, guns, stuff like that. After we see the first clip, we're going to get to Erin and tell us what she thought of the meeting and the topics raised. Bruce, let's tee that up. 3, 2, 1, hit it.
Before we get into our program, I just want to let people know what the format will be. This will be a combined presentation of the Board of Education professionals and the town's public safety officials. After the presentation, there will be the opportunity for public comment.
One of the other components for us is we are involved in the alternative to suspension program for children that violate the alcohol drug policy for the school system. And that. The other issues that we spend quite a bit of time working with the elementary schools with an anti-bullying program that we bring into each school for 2nd graders and 4th graders. And we actually use high school students as part of that conversation to take them into the schools to talk to the kids about those issues.
In addition, each school also has their own security meeting that's monthly, which we're a part of. The lockdown drills, state statute requires boards to hold crisis response drills at least 3 times a year. We're much more proactive in that regard here, at least 5 times a year. Dr. Menzo mentioned the camera system. We will light up that system should one of these schools go into lockdown. We know that the cameras are of high quality, but we also recognize that there's not a camera in every hallway, in every little nook and cranny of every school.
We also have increased our mental health professionals in our schools, especially over the last 3 to 4 years. This year, if you're following our budget, we have a recommendation for 4 additional mental health professionals at our elementary schools. We are trying to address and offer supports to our youngest students and their families, and we are trying to layer those services. In the situation that you're alluding to, I'll talk about the elephant in the room, which is the fact that at the end of a school day prior to dismissal, there was a report to the office that a student had yelled, "Get down, take cover." That student, the student that we believed had done that, was intercepted, shall we say, within minutes of it coming to the attention of the main office. That quote-unquote, if I could finish, that quote-unquote threat was resolved. There was no need to put the rest of the students in an anxiety-filled situation at that point.
Well, to answer your question, I am not a fan of guns on the school property at all, right? So, this is a touchy subject, and I know that it's a national debate that's going on right now. I will offer you this. The state of Connecticut offers, through state statute, the opportunity for school districts to employ armed guards. They don't necessarily have to be police officers, but I don't believe that we need more guns on school property.
I'm asking the town, would you be willing to find more funds to get more programs and more support for the staff?
I would like to ask the committee what they're doing to look at our cultural issues, because while it's important to intersect mental health issues, while we can see them, changing our culture is even more important, because these kids get pushed outside because we have issues that like institutionalized racism and socioeconomic status, shame. It's hard to be poor and it's hard to be different. And so how are we going to change our culture?
So we are entering that age for social media. Not only how to use it well, but to understand the risks and the detriments by using it too much or in the wrong way. And it is a major issue that comes into play with depression and suicide issues, because kids are reading things either about themselves that are untrue, that are just horrible, or they believe that things are true for other people when they're not, where it gives the impression that everybody else is living a better life than they do. So there's a lot of education that has to go on, because most of it, if you broke it down, are lies. And believing lies is the first step to being really confused about what reality is. And kids are very predisposed to believing the lies that their peers tell for one reason, and one reason only: approval.
So that's the longest clip we have, is a little over 4 minutes. We saw there the Director of Youth and Social Services, Craig Turner, talking, he was the last one to speak there about social media. Of course, the police chief, Chief Wright, Dr. Menzo, the superintendent of schools, was featured there, and introducing the meeting was Chairman Vinnie Cervoni. It wasn't an easy meeting to run, so I put him in the clip that sort of set up our discussion. Obviously, this is a collage of clips that I strung together, and we have 3 more. They're shorter, and there was some editorial judgment as to which speakers to select. There were so many good and thoughtful comments, but what I tried to do is at least capture the atmosphere in the room and some of the broad topics. Now, if you have a child in the school system, or if you're a parent or a teacher, I highly recommend you go to government TV and watch the entire meeting. I think it's just under 2 hours or something close to that, because there's a lot of material covered and a lot of good information. Erin, your thoughts first on the clip and some of the topics that were brought up.
Sure. So I learned a lot at that meeting as a parent. You know, I thought, obviously, it was very well attended. It was very respectful. People were allowed to share their thoughts and feelings. You know, I was pleased with our entire support services, and not just Board of Education members, not just Dr. Menzo, but our entire staff of support services. I thought Craig Turner was awesome. I thought Chief Wright was great. You know, I agree with a lot of things that he has to say. So, you know, I thought it was a really well done forum for our community.
Yeah, Ralph, your general thoughts, and I want to get a little bit more specific on the clip and on that meeting.
God, such a broad topic. I guess though, I have to. My impression sitting here is, you know, one of the most common comments I get from people my age or older about either high school students or millennials in general is, wow, they're so anxious, they're so nervous, they seem so worried about nothing.
Yeah.
And then you watch this and you realize that these kids have been going to lockdown drills, every month of their school lives. They're worried about somebody with an AK-47 coming into their school, metal detectors, depression, social. So since the Parkland shooting, I've had a better understanding, and I'm sorry to say it took that to wake me up, of why these kids might be so anxious, and I understand it now.
Erin, Chief Wright, Police Chief Wright, made a comment that I'm not sure everyone interpreted in the same way, and I wanted to get the Board of Ed's or your personal perspective. he said he's not in favor of more guns in the schools. And I took that to mean, in context, that he wasn't in favor of teachers with guns. Was that the right context?
That's how I interpreted it, because he did talk about the state statute allowing, obviously, police officers could have weapons on campus, and there's a statute you can hire armed guards on a school campus as well.
Yeah.
So on a personal level, I do not believe in arming teachers. I work in a school also. I'm a school counselor. I don't think that's the answer, to arm any teacher. But I would like to see permanent school resource officers in our schools. We have one at my high school. He's fabulous. I think, you know, when you first have a police officer in your hallways every day, it can be a little intimidating. But that police officer typically wants to be there, wants to connect with kids, and can form really positive relationships with kids. So it's not an us versus them mentality. It's a we working together mentality. So, you know, I can't say enough about the school resource officer we have in our school.
Which is?
Ansonia High School. His name is Officer Barry. He's fabulous. He runs a morning judo program for anybody who wants to go to it, but he picks kids up at their houses between 5 and 5:30 in the morning. So for any kid who wants to join, they can join. We also use that program as an alternate to discipline. So, you know, instead of serving a suspension or a detention, they can go to Officer Barry's morning program for 10 days and hopefully get a little bit more out of that than they would otherwise. So I think there's lots of different ways you can use school resource officers, and, you know, they can be really effective.
Rob?
I agree with Erin on school resource officers, not so much for the armed guard function, but for the preventative function. But as a resident, I'm continually disappointed that the superintendent of schools and past Board of Educations tell me they can't afford it, and they have somewhere around a $90 million school budget. So I'm going to put maybe $103 million. Thank you, Erin. So I'm going to ask Erin, as a resident, do you understand how I feel?
Absolutely.
Okay, so then why are we being told that there's no money?
So I'm told, when I asked the same question, that it has to be funded through the police budget. And ultimately, it all comes out of the same pot. So whether it comes out of the police budget or whether it comes out of the Board of Ed budget, I see it's important. And it's important to have in our community. I know it's been in for 3 years. It's been in the past 3 years of budgets. And, you know, I'm told that it's not paid for, it shouldn't be paid for through the Board of Ed. So I know there's grants available and things like that. Regardless, I think it's an important thing to have. From what I understand, Dr. Menzo and I had a conversation about it, and he will ask the town council again when the budget goes back to them to fund them. So I hope it happens. You know, I'm one voice, but I do hope it happens.
So there's a lot to unpack between both of your comments, and I'm going to try to unpack it. And as you often do, Ralph, you force me into the foil position, whether or not I really think that. But first, let's unpack the money part of it. I think there's a couple of different models to do this, and it's a policy choice. One model is the Board of Ed, out of their budget, hires whoever they want. If they, you know, there's a state statute with security guards, and I think the Board of Ed has actually a job description that is consistent with that. So one model would be the Board of Ed gets money, or they get a lump sum, and no one is telling, in my hypothetical, no one is telling the Board of Ed don't hire police necessarily in my hypothetical model. Hire whoever you want, hire as many security guards as you want, do whatever you want to do, but here's $103 million. Knock yourself out. Hire 10, 5, 2, 1, whatever you want to do. You know, triage the money any way you need to. It's a policy decision by the town of Wallingford, the mayor, really, to have the police officers, the resource officers, come out of the police department and answer to the chief. That's one way of doing it. It's not irrational. It's just one way of doing it, and the other way of doing it, the Board of Ed goes out and hires their own security guards. either way, they got to be, paid for it. And Erin, I'm going to ask you to react to my comments first. But you're absolutely right. It all comes out of the same pocket, whether it's the police department budget or the Board of Ed budget. It's the taxpayers. And the rest is sort of administrative contest, I guess, who gets to control. Erin, your thoughts on
So, yeah, I understand that. So hiring a independent private contractor security guard, that person, I would imagine, has one role, and that's the physical safety of our building. Putting school resource officers in our buildings, now you have an additional adult that can do a lot more than what just a private security guard can do. So he or she is embedded in our building, they're part of our community, they're helping, they could be dealing with drug issues, they could be dealing with fighting, whether or not that's happening in our schools. But that's another way that you can use a school resource officer. I mean, you can use it when there's domestic issues, because there is. You can use it when the police officers, when there's trauma that's going on in our communities, or in our children's lives, which I think is really significant and often not touched on. So those are all the ways that we can use school resource officers as opposed to a private security guard who's there for physical safety of the building.
Ralph?
Well, I just want to make clear my objection to when either the superintendent of schools or the mayor tries to say that they don't, that the notion that they can't find a small amount of money in $170 million is what I object to. When we know that there is money in these budgets that will either go unspent, that is discretionary, they're deciding. For example, why do we need, for example, on the school side, why do we need to spend $50,000 to hire an outside consultant to study our school buildings?
We're going to ask Erin that in about 5 minutes.
But I'm using it as a point.
Keep going, but keep going. Yeah,
so,
I didn't mean to stop
So when
you
say to the people, I can't find the money, or it didn't make it because the money wasn't there, what you really should be saying, if you want to be honest, if you're the mayor or Sal Menzo, is I've decided to spend money on something other than a school resource officer. That's what you're saying to people. And you should have the decency to look them in the eyes and say, I have $170 million, and I've decided to spend it on other things rather than a school resource officer. Don't tell me you don't have money. That's dishonest.
Well, there's always money.
Right.
There's always the mill rate that you can drive up as high as you want. I mean, I don't think anyone is saying that as an abstract principle there isn't money. Add another mill. Add another mill to the mill rate. That's $4.3 million. You could hire maybe, a resource officer for every school for $1 million a year, and then, of course, that grows. So I think what the mayor is saying, maybe not terribly artfully, is he has decided on a mill rate, and on the mill rate that he has decided upon, the Board of Ed can do with its $103 million whatever it wants.
Right.
Respond to that.
I'm saying sharpen your pencil.
Yeah.
You want
$104 million.
I'm saying, Mike, anybody who does a budget knows that in a $103 million budget, I can guarantee you
this is the Board of Ed.
This is there's a minimum of $1 million in there that'll either go unspent or is extremely discretionary and could be, $1 million in a $103 million budget is less than 1%. So that's my point.
There's another thing I want to pack, and then I'm going to ask Erin to respond, and then we're going to move on. In the context of the events of the past month or so, resource officer can sound a bit sanitized, that phrase. And in the Ansonia school system that Erin was reporting on, it's one particular model. But many people are saying, I want a guy with a gun. That's what I want. I want a guy with a gun. I don't want to sanitize it and split his duties up. I want a guy with a gun that if he's on the 3rd floor patrolling for intruders, he'll know there's an intruder on the 1st floor when he hears gunshots. And I want him to run down with his pistol drawn and take the guy on, start a firefight if it comes to that. That's what today I think a lot of people are saying. I want a guy with a gun. Erin, I had a couple of comments. Any thoughts on my 2 comments?
You know, again, I mean, a school resource officer is a guy with a gun, and he is in the hallways every day, and he's multifaceted. He does a lot of things for our building. So I would respond by saying that is our guy with a gun. That being said, to be honest with you, I would say in Wallingford, how many police officers are actually facing combat, facing, you know, getting shot at? Not a whole lot.
Yeah.
So whether we have a guy with a gun, you know, whether it's a private security officer, whether it's a police officer, how they're going to react in those situations, we don't really, ultimately, we don't really know until that happens.
Is a resource officer, in your view, Erin, a deterrent for an intruder?
I
or
think,
is that wishful thinking?
You know, it wasn't a deterrent in Parkland.
Right.
It wasn't, but when done right, it can be a, you know, a source for information and a source for counsel prior to something like that happening. So, you know, done right.
Ralph?
No, you know what? I think Erin just made my point, that I see it more as a preventative
Right.
measure.
As a deterrent?
It
Is that what you
certainly
mean?
is a deterrent. Listen,
Yeah.
anytime you have a police officer anywhere, I think that is deterring a certain amount of people. But my ultimate hope with a police officer is that they can prevent things, hopefully, from getting to a point where someone is coming into the school or a student with a gun. So that's more why I favor school resource.
The reason why I'm hammering this nail is because resource officer means different things to different people.
Right.
And I just want to do whatever we can on this 1-hour show, that when the term resource officer is referred to, we know what concept, what model we're talking about. Because I think there was a speaker at this meeting. To him, resource officer was a guy with a gun, security. Not in a classroom, not counseling, a guy with a gun. And I think there were 12 schools in the school system, or maybe 11, and that you have one resource officer in one school, and that leaves exposed the 11. You have a resource officer or a guy with a gun in 2 high schools, and that exposes the other 10. I mean, it never ends. You ready for that next clip?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Let's do that. In this particular clip, it's just short of 2 minutes. There's a teacher, I believe from DAG, who is talking about an experience he had recently with a fire drill. And he refers to, he uses a little jargon, but I believe Professional Development Day, and he may say a PD Day, I'm not sure. And I think the issue of metal detectors come up in this particular clip. Bruce, let's hit that. 3, 2, 1, go.
Sometimes it becomes extremely stressful. 2 weeks ago, for example, when we had the fire drill right before we were supposed to get out of school at 12:15, I give you an example. The cafeteria was filled. The fire alarm went off. I jumped into action. I took 92 kids out through my door, and we got them at the time we thought to safety. Because one of the things that I think that we should have for teachers, we should have a PD day where basically the entire staff goes and we are trained as to what we need to be able to do. I can tell you on that, I can tell you on that Friday, nerves were raw in our building. People were afraid. They didn't know what was actually going on. But we got through the day. We did what had to be done for our students. A contractor coming into the building. So, okay, they get buzzed in. They have their tool bucket with them. What do we know what's in their tool bucket? They could be a contractor that has come in 17 times in that year. And all it could be is just that one time that something is put into that bucket. How do we know? So what kind of protocol do we need to have in place to be able to check?
Have each and every student and every staff member pass through a metal detector, both in and out, right, when they're leaving for the day or coming back from a meeting in another part of the district, is incredibly consuming for resources. So where they are present in a number of cities already, you need the support staff there to manage that.
So, professional development, I think, is education jargon for training. Erin, do our teachers need more training and for these kinds of situations, in your view?
Yep. So, another topic that was brought up is, and I think kind of what he's referring to is ALICE training, which is active shooter training for schools.
ALICE. Okay. Yeah.
I'm ALICE trained. And ALICE training is very empowering to school faculty. Especially, I would say, you know, there's a lot of teachers that are very specific rule followers and want to know exactly what to do given a certain, they want to follow it to a T. They want to know that this is what I'm supposed to do in this type of situation. So ALICE training does that in a sense, in that it empowers an adult in charge to make the best decisions possible for kids. And that's not always locking into one tiny little spot in the classroom. It's kind of evaluating the situation, the circumstances, and getting as many kids out as you can.
As I understand from our prior conversations before the show, Ansonia teachers are ALICE trained. Wallingford teachers are not.
No, but hopefully we will be. They will be starting
What does that involve as far as
year.
Resources, time? Is this a big deal?
So we did a full day PD on it. I have to say, in 15 years in education, it was my most powerful and unfortunately useful PD I'd ever been involved in. My first PD back in 2000 was probably on reading strategies in the classroom, and here I am 18 years later learning how to escape an active shooter. So education has changed significantly. But that being said, ALICE training, I think all or most of Massachusetts schools are now ALICE trained, and it gives us options instead of locking into a classroom.
Yeah.
So,
Ralph, I had the clip of this teacher because I wanted to try to relay a sense of what teachers might be experiencing, or at least some teachers. So I wanted to get that in there, and I think what was going on, the Florida shooting, I think started with a fire alarm. And so here a fire alarm went off, so it can be, as you said, very stressful. Any thoughts, or should I go to the third?
Well, I'm just going to make a quick point about metal detectors, because I think Chief Wright makes an excellent point about metal detectors, but what's going on in the wake of Parkland is parents are thinking to themselves, well, we had problems with airplanes, and look at what we do at airports. And Lord knows, if you want to get into a state or federal government building, we know what you have to go through. If you want to get into the New York Times or a big media company, we know. So these buildings have been hardened. So I understand where parents are coming from. They're saying our most valuable, the most valuable thing we have in this country is our children. Why aren't we hardening schools in the same way?
Are you in favor of metal detectors?
I am not.
Erin, are you in favor of metal detectors?
No.
But what I'm making the point is that I'm not, but I'm not sending my children to school anymore. I understand, Erin is, so she's got a little, I understand why these parents want it, and hopefully if there's more shootings, I just don't see how you're going to avoid not making that move. That's what's coming next, is what I'm trying to say.
The third clip features Craig Turner, Youth and Social Services, and one of the broad themes at this March 6th meeting was mental health, how the school system can attempt to react to it. We didn't capture all those clips. There's a lot more in the meeting. and the role of social media and how that can adversely impact a student's mental health. So let's roll that third one, and then we'll chat a little bit at the back end of it. Bruce, 3, 2, 1, go.
Once we hear it, it's not confidential. It's one of the few pieces of information that if we know a child's going to hurt themselves or another person, we are obligated to respond to that to get them help, or to notify someone to protect the other person if we know it's going to hurt someone else. And that's the resistance for children. They don't want to rat out their friend.
Erin, you're closer to the kids and social media than Ralph and I are. Just give us your thoughts on the topic he's raising.
So, truth, what he says. We are obligated as a counselor that I keep many things confidential. However, if a student is going to hurt themselves, threatening to hurt somebody else, that's something that I cannot keep confidential. So that's the truth. I actually disagree with him in that he says that keeps kids from telling. I actually think kids today are far more in tune with the help that each other needs. And I've experienced quite a few kids come to me worried about their friends, and concerned and things like that. So there are kids that don't want to rat on each other. There are kids that don't want to do that, but when kids are in crisis and their friends know it, that's oftentimes how we find out about things. So I encourage kids all the time. We hear that logo on TV, if you see something, say something. And it's so true. And same with parents. I think it's important as parents, if we're seeing or hearing stuff on social media that kids are, or even in conversation with our own kids, our own children, that we bring it to appropriate authorities. It's not always to say that we can do something about it every single time, but to know about it is certainly really helpful. And if we can act, we will act. So that's as a professional, my role, and a parent. That's my role as a parent also.
So we got a fourth clip, which in part includes a teacher and the issue of guns. I think it's about a minute and a half. At the back end of that, Erin, I want to ask you whether or not there's money in the current budget that you guys have proposed for a resource officer or two, and if you know about how much is in there for that, so we can get Ralph's tax increase going here. So let's hit that fourth.
We can do it without that tax increase.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Erin.
Let's get that fourth clip. 3, 2, 1, go.
I'm asking the community to seriously think about funding a resource officer in both high schools, or at least even an armed security guard, something to stop someone from doing harm to our children. Okay, the gun debate is outside. We have to protect our kids now. And I'm coming from a selfish position. I have my son in the building. If something happens in the building, I'm taking care of the kids in my classroom, but I don't know what's going on with my kid. If I know there's a resource officer in the school, that if something does happen, the chance of limited damage is going to be reduced. You got to train these kids to do something. Throw books, throw desks, barricade them. Teach them to do something to survive these events. If we're not teaching those kids that, they're ducks. They're sitting ducks.
Because I will tell you up front, the state actually takes a very serious look at suicide because it is a leading cause of death.
And I know I've heard you say you are doing a lot, and I'm very grateful for all that you're doing, but it's still happening. And is there any other options that you could think of? I do think that you guys have really been very informative tonight, and I learned a lot of things that I didn't know about programs that you had in place, not just for safety, but for also mental health. And I just kind of want to put a plea out there that you don't stop.
And that ends our clips with that parent. But that gives a bit of a flavor, I hope, about some of the passion that was in the room and the depth of the feeling on some of these topics. Erin, back to budgets. Are resource officers included, if you know, in the Board of Ed proposal?
They're not included in this proposal. Nope.
So, in order to get a resource officer or a guy with a gun, someone would have to make a motion or something to increase the budget. Historically, we know the Board of Ed submits a budget to the mayor, and the mayor, cuts it. There is precedent for the town council making motions to increase it, to increase the mayor's budget to allow for things like resource officers. Final thoughts on the tax increase that, and the reason why I keep linking it,
Right.
because it's so easy to escape the financial consequences. And that's what's driving the decision on the town end. That's why I keep bringing you back to it.
Right.
Because it's life, it's reality on the ground.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But as I said, I think you can find money within that existing pot. But what I had a question, because I did not watch the entire forum or attend it. I'm just wondering, was gun legislation discussed at all?
No, not really. It was more on our safety in our schools and what our community does in response to that. So we didn't really talk about gun legislation in that forum.
Because I find it interesting, and Mike and I have talked about this, that really the students at Parkland have really asked us to focus on, I think, a few things. One, whether someone who is 18 years old should be able to buy an AK-47. I think that's one of the main things they've asked us to focus on. And I think they've also are asking us to focus on not taking guns away from law-abiding citizens or for hunting or defense. They've asked us to think about things like clips that allow you to fire massive amounts of ammunition. I think they've asked some very reasonable things about gun laws, and I continue to be surprised that local officials here in Wallingford appear not to want to discuss those publicly. Or maybe I'm reading way too much into it, Mike.
Well, that's a good segue into what could be our next segment, although I do want to get back to the budget at the end. But let's address this. First, with respect to the meeting on March 6th, I think that's a topic that no one wanted to bring up because you could really get bogged down in the politics and, you could get sidetracked so easily. And I think it was useful to sort of narrow the focus on school security and what can and cannot be done locally rather than national policy. Erin, did I read that?
Yeah,
right?
And to be honest with you, I don't think, on a personal level, I don't know, I know some about guns, but as a board member, I'm not a gun expert, and I don't know enough about guns to make comments regarding what we should and shouldn't have. I've got my own personal thoughts and personal opinions about it, but I'm not an expert. I know school. I know education. I know kids.
Okay, so let's talk about the walkout.
Yeah, let's talk about the walkout.
Because that's sort of what you were...
Yeah, that was the focus of the walkout.
Yeah, that was the focus of the walkout. So Wallingford has a very interesting short history on this. I don't have all the Record Journal articles memorized in chronological order, but I know the trend, and one of the early stories was, after the shooting, that some of the students in the high schools wanted to do something, and so someone opened up a dialogue with someone, so the students and administrators could discuss the issue. Then somewhere along the line, the administration issued a very strict, stern, rigid, and I think sort of a bullying memo saying walkout's going to result in suspension, and we're going to enforce it to the full letter of the law. Those are my words. It's but it's sort of to be read into it. And then an article appeared in the paper that some students were going to walk out anyway, despite this stern warning. And then, lo and behold, today, March 14, on the online version of the Record Journal, we find out that students did walk out, and Dr. Menzo, superintendent of schools, said, no discipline.
Right.
Erin, what's going on here?
So, I don't think that the original intent in letting kids know the consequences of their actions was anything other than that. I don't think it was bullying, you know. I think it was just,
Well, wait,
this is
you're
what
going to
the
be
law...
suspended from school. That could means you don't get into the college of your choice.
That's not true.
Go ahead.
That's definitely not true.
Go ahead.
That's state statute and that's board policy. You know, if you're going to walk out, regardless of what it is, there's nothing in there that says you can't walk out for this, but you can walk out for that. So it's just, you know, policy.
I
And
just
kids
want
are
to clarify
passionate.
this. So Berkeley. No, let's pick an Ivy Leaguer. So Yale is under, and that's a Connecticut school. Let's go to Notre Dame University.
Okay.
Where's that? Indiana.
Indiana.
Right.
So
South
it's
Bend.
against the law for. It's against Connecticut law that Indiana, that Notre Dame doesn't accept someone because they were suspended?
So each school district has
Right.
their own policy on reporting discipline to
Right.
colleges. So if it's school policy, to be honest with you, I don't know what Wallingford policy is
We'll
when
look
it comes
into
to
it, okay.
reporting discipline to colleges. I do know that a lot of colleges came out and said if you get suspended or if there's consequences to you walking out, we're not going to hold it against you. So I think that's what the university side said.
Yeah.
Kids are passionate about things, and you know, if my child was passionate enough to want to walk out despite all the other options available to them, then they would have to accept the consequences of their actions. That's society, that's civilized society. You accept consequences to your actions. And I think that that's what the administration was trying to say. Maybe it didn't come off that way. Maybe it wasn't reported that way, but I think that that was what the intent of what it was. Sure, there was kids that still walked out, you know, and if that's what they wanted to do, and they're willing to accept those consequences, then that's what they do, and they get their suspension, they get their detention, whatever it was. The fact that that changed today, I actually didn't get to talk to Dr. Benzo after school today.
So that came as a surprise to you, too.
It did.
Okay.
So, I mean, ultimately, he's in charge, and if that's what he ends up deciding to do, then that's his decision to make.
Well, ultimately, you're in charge, but...
I'm not in charge of the day-to-day
no, but
workings of the school. Absolutely not.
Did the Board of Ed discuss as a body the fact that the suspension policy would be enforced the letter of the law?
We did not.
Okay.
We did not discuss that as a body.
Dr.
No.
Menzo was just referring to pre-existing policy.
Right.
Ralph, did it...
It's state law, too, I think.
What is?
I think it's state law in that walkouts can cause disruptions to school environments, which can result in suspensions. I think it's not just board policy, it's state statute as well.
I just want to point out that
I'm always afraid when you say that.
just to give it some context, it doesn't make Superintendent Menzo right or wrong.
Yep.
But in the schools that we cover in our area, he was the one who by far took the hardest line, pre-walkout.
Yeah.
And just as a resident, as a journalist, I was curious why he took this hard line, and I still don't understand it. But just as a resident, I wish he didn't take that hard of a line.
Erin, did it seem like a hard line, and why was Wallingford the hardest?
No, it did not seem like a hard line to me.
Okay.
It seemed like this is, you know, existing policy, and there are consequences to our actions, and we can protest.
Yeah.
And if we're passionate enough to protest, and if it's something we feel really strongly about, you know, I encourage it. However, you may get a consequence. I mean,
so let's compare and contrast, because that's what you were beginning to do. So across our region, across the state, and across the country, school administrations with similar policies on the books took a wide variety of approaches. The best approach, in my view, was involving administration and faculty members assisting the students to speak out on the cause of their time, you know, the fight of their lives, literally, but also of their era. And someone recently compared it to the Vietnam era when students, you know, protested. So there's many, many examples, probably hundreds of examples, where school administrations appreciated the spirit and passion of the students and wanted to facilitate that, make it non-disruptive, make it safe, and to communicate to the students, we get it, and a walkout, works for us, and let's sort of manage it the right way. Wallingford did not take that approach.
And Meriden, excuse me, Mike.
Yeah.
Meriden, Southington, and Cheshire took that approach.
The one that I...
So it's these contiguous towns.
Yeah.
I'm not, again, I'm just saying what other towns did. They took that approach.
Yeah.
Did Meriden and Cheshire and Southington have other options for kids also?
I think they did have other options, and I'd have to review our coverage right away.
Yeah.
And in some cases, the students ended up staying inside the building, but it was this administration supporting the students doing what they wanted to do. That's all. And so I just want to point that out. That's what those towns did.
So I've got a letter that I believe was sent by the Florida kids to other school communities. I'm going to pick out 2 short paragraphs because I think it was well done. I think this Florida kids...
Right, and then I have some comments from students. I think I want it. That'll fit in nicely.
Communities across the country walked out of classrooms to send one message: enough. We have seen enough senseless gun violence. We have lived in fear too long. We have buried too many heroes. We demand better. Today was wonderful. Today was important. Today was historical. But sadly, today was not enough. Paid supporters of the NRA will blame us for being naive and entitled when the only thing we seek is to feel safe. Ralph, you're next, and Erin's going to wrap up that topic.
And I think earlier I said that I don't have children in the schools anymore, so I can't relate to that.
Yeah.
But what I can relate to is having raised children and looking back and critiquing myself. And one of the things that jumps out at me is I realize now that at times when my children wanted to talk about one thing, I directed the conversation in another direction. Probably because I was uncomfortable, I didn't get it, and I regret that. And that's why I brought up the point about guns not being at that forum. So that's just the perspective I have of looking back at how I dealt with children. And so here's some comments from students today. From Lyman Hall High School, Holly Ann Lau. As students, we felt it was necessary to take a stand for what we believed in. We chose to come together to make this happen because we don't want the conversation to end about gun violence. This is from Cheshire High School. Yes, we have the right to bear arms, but that right should never infringe upon others. Our right to be safe at school trumps your right to have a gun. And this is from, sorry I didn't get that student's name, Isabel Orozco. This is from Platt High School, Joseph Crespo. We as a society and a community have become numb and desensitized to these acts of violence. I'd argue we've become so desensitized to this act of violence that even when town and school officials gather, they don't want to talk about gun control. We normalize these acts and tragedies so much so that when there is another one we say, rest in peace, that's sad. Things need to change. The reality never hits us because we assume it can never hit us. The time for change is now. And my point is that these kids do want to talk about guns. And I think we're not serving them well when we put the conversation in another direction just because we're uncomfortable with it, we're not experts in it, or whatever reasons we have for not wanting to have that conversation in public.
Erin, you got the final word on this topic, and then we'll move on. You don't have to, but I mean.
I think that there's certainly some students that want to talk about it. I think kids had the option to do that today. I think kids have the option of doing that moving forward. And we'll see how it plays out moving forward if kids are going to continue with it.
Okay. So I'm going back to March 9, Saturday, edition of the Record Journal. School Board approves $102.9 million budget. Erin, you're in this story. You are quoted. You played a role, and it looks like you cast a dissenting vote. Give us a little context, and what were you voting against, and what would you support?
So I felt as though we did not do a good enough job vetting out sustained services. I think we have a huge budget.
By vetting out, do you mean maybe looking for ways to trim?
Yep.
Is that what you mean?
Yep.
Okay.
Trim sustained services. We have a huge budget. I am in favor, you mentioned the facility survey earlier, I am in favor of the facility survey because I think ultimately it will save us money when we figure out exactly what needs to be done and how we can potentially combine schools and or renovate schools. We haven't had a new school building in Wallingford since Sheehan, 1970. We haven't had a new school building in a very long time. So I was not only thinking about this year's budget, but I'm thinking about moving forward, how we're going to save money moving forward in order to address the needs that are going to come out of that facility survey. So I thought we have a huge budget, and I think that we can spend it differently. And when you mentioned the same thing, how we can't find that money to fund resource officers, I think we can.
Do you have to use a phrase, have you set your sights on a particular category of expenses that you think needs to be trimmed?
Well, there was only a couple that I brought up. I think the things that were cut out of our budget were I think it ended up being 6.5 or 7 teachers that, due to student enrollment, are, we don't really project to need those anymore. I suggested we take a look at college and career counselors. I think it's really hard to touch the union and open up that union contract. It takes a lot of money to do that. So I was looking at non-union positions. Those were some of them. I looked at high school PE, our high school PE requirements. We require 2 full credits of PE for graduation, and the state requires 1. So I suggested we take a look at high school PE as a cost-saving measure. I was the only one that...
That's a pretty good, healthy list.
Healthy high school PE.
I mean,
being healthy is important.
Supple list.
But those are the couple things that I suggested we take a look at.
So what about breakfast? School may add breakfast. This is a front page of, it's a Monday, it's a Monday, slow news day. February 26th, right. Schools may add breakfast. What was the discussion there, and where do you stand on that?
That's as a result of our new food service director, and there's quite a bit of federal and or state money that we can access for kids on free and reduced lunch, offering breakfast options.
This would be paid for by the state?
Yeah, this is not a cost to the district. That does not add any money to our district. That is either free or reduced lunch kids to our individual district.
So why not do it? You might, probably will.
Yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't happen. I mean, if you're either full pay and you're paying the cost of lunches to begin with, or you're on free and reduced lunch, which the state and federal government also pick up costs for that. So adding breakfast is not a cost to the district, in theory.
Ralph, any final thoughts before I move into something totally different on this?
No, let's do something totally different. Sounds good.
And Erin, this is not, this is just the kind of stuff we do on the Citizen Mike Show, and it's not, This is from the Washington Post. It's always suspicious when a federal agency quietly makes a major policy change and does not put out a news release about it. That's what the Interior Department did last week. Handing another win to the National Rifle Association, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services withdrew a ban related to importing elephant trophies from Africa. A March 1 memorandum written in dense legalese said the government will now allow hunters to receive permits on a case-by-case basis. So, what do you do if there's a rampaging elephant in the wilds of Africa? What do you need a good guy with a gun.
Right.
We can now go back on a case-by-case basis, go back to importing elephant trophies, tusks, heads, tails, hooves, whatever you want. Case by case. Maybe it all depends on how much you contribute to campaigns. I don't know. Erin, you didn't want to weigh in on that subject, did you?
No.
I did. You did. Thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show. Hey, we've done walruses, you know, we've done animal stuff, and we're going to do more. And global warming stuff. Thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show. Erin, you're a good sport. We covered a lot of ground, and we appreciate it, and our viewers appreciate it. And thanks to our viewers for watching the Citizen Mike Show. We're here on Wednesday evenings now, and you can watch the Citizen Mike Show on WPAA Thursdays at 9, Fridays at 9, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays at 9. Or it's on YouTube. You know, punch in or search Citizen Mike Wallingford channel and get all the prompts. We can now send you an email link directly to the show. It makes it a lot easier. Just let me know that you want a link to a new show emailed. We'll do it. Thanks. Have a good evening. And if it's 9 at night, it's Citizen Mike. Good night, everybody. Good night, Erin.
Good night.
Yeah.